So the boy said, this is class 4 on Perek Chof. We are learning about Achdus Hashem. We're learning about the mitzvah saseh of the unity of God. That's what it is. It's a positive commandment. It's a mitzvah saseh that's connected to Achdus Hashem. L'yachadoi. It's the Lashon HaRambam. L'yachadoi. To make him one. Now what does it mean to make him one? If you're not going to make him one, he's going to be two. And of course the pshat is, l'yachadoi means to make him one vis-a-vis ourselves. To make him one for us. That in our life there should be the truth of Ein Eid Milvadeh. There should be the truth of Achdus Hashem, right? That's the touch l'yachadoi. Meaning, we have an inyan of emunah, which is a pre-mitzvah or a super mitzvah, like I explained 2 weeks ago and I repeated last week. The first of the Tayag mitzvahs, like it says in Rambam, is Leidash Yesham Motzei Rishon, is a mitzvah to say of knowing Hashem intellectually. And included in this first mitzvah is knowing Seder Ishtalshalos and knowing about Elokus and knowing that He's one. It's all part of Yidiyas Hashem. Achdus Hashem doesn't mean there's one God and not two. No. That's called reason and not stupidity. That's not a mitzvah. Achdus Hashem means there's one God and there's no second. That means we don't exist. That's the chap. The chap of Achdus is that the world is not in addition to Him. Not this chas v'shalom a second God or a consideration of a second God or a consideration of a lack of control in one way or another or another. Achdus Havaya means Ein Eid Milvadeh. Besides, for the Eibishter there's nothing. Meaning the world doesn't exist. So we read a bunch of lines. Yeah, we did last week. Let me say this to you. Okay, I'm an expert at giving introductions, which is a nice way of saying wasting time. So one of my introductions is as follows. Siddhis Chabad is a beautiful thing. We had Nayem Yem of last Shabbos. The Noyam of Teres HaChasidus. The sweetness, the zizkeit, the sweetness of learning and understanding Chassidus. It's a beautiful thing. It's an incredible thing. It's a very, very vast thing. And it's bigger and deeper and more detailed than we'll ever understand. Really. It's not like the kids say, every Maimon says the same thing in other words. It's not. It's not exactly so. In any case, Chassidus Chabad is a philosophy that teaches this principle of Achdus Hashem. Chassidus Chabad is Yechida. Chassidus is Yechida. Chassidus Chabad is the Seichel of Yechida. Which means the understanding of Achdus Hashem. And understanding Achdus Hashem in a way of Yadai Tayem V'Hashevei Yisrael L'Vavecha. You learn about the Eibishter, you learn about the world, you learn about how the world and the Eibishter are one. The Rebbe used to bring the Ramban, right? Keil Eilam and not Keil Ha-Eilam. V'yikra Sham B'Shem B'Shem Keil Eilam. So the Rebbe brought it from the Ramban. That it doesn't say that the Eibishter is the master of the world. It says the Eibishter is the master world, without a Hey. The is missing. So the Rebbe says the reason the Hey is missing because it denotes that there's no two things, the Eibishter and the world. The Eibishter and the world are one. This is called Yichud. This is called Achdus. This is called unity. So when you learn Chassidus, which is the Torah of Achdus Hashem, on the level of Yechida, you have what's called Hisbonenuyos, meditations, for lack of words. Hisbonenuyos does not really mean meditation. Hisbonenuyos really means contemplation, but it doesn't matter. We could use the word meditation. You're not going to sue me for it. At least I hope you won't. Chassidus Chabad offers meditations. In other words, if you're a chassid, or you're a serious Jew, and the foundation of being a Jew, Reishis Ha'avodah V'Ikar V'Shosh is Yirat Shamayim and Kabbalah Seil, is Sur Meirah's Bittel. But on that foundation of Sur Meirah, on that foundation of Yid and Bittel, you have to have Lichtigkeit, light, joy, warmth. And that comes from connecting to Elokus. And the way you connect to Elokus is through contemplating Elokus. This is the Chabad method. It's called the long, short approach. So in Mimalei Chasidus, you have a collection of meditations. In other words, Chassidus Chabad is thousands of Maimonim. It's between 10 and 20,000 Mimalei Chassidus. From the 7 Abayim of Chabad, it's between 10 and 20,000 Maimonim. I actually once counted it roughly. Our Rebbe said around 1,500 Maimonim. But you gather all the Rabbeim together, it's over 10,000 Maimarim. It's a lot. And these Maimarim teach different things, and you can meditate in any Maimon. But in certain Maimarim, it says, meditate on this. It's specific. It identifies certain things as specific for the purpose of Hisbonenuyos, of meditation. So many years ago, I compiled a list of these meditations, and people ask me for it, and I'll send it to you. It's obviously a partial list, but I bring sources for each one. When you learn Siddhis, and you learn about the meditations of Siddhis, there are in general three classes. This is how I understand it. There's lower meditations, there's middle meditations, and there's higher meditations. Meaning I could think about Hashem on a level which is lower, closer to me. If I think about Hashem on a level which is lower and closer to me, the upside is that it's more honest. The upside is that it's more realistic. The upside is that what I'm thinking about, I could actually live. The downside is it's not the whole truth. It's the truth on a lower level. We would call Das Tachten and so on, Yehuda Tatoa and so on. The higher meditations are much truer. But the higher meditations talk to the Eibishter on a Madrege that Nitya Eina Halpazeh, not everybody's holding. I don't know if you are familiar. But there's a kuntis from the Rebbe Rashab, kuntis called Kuntis Eitz HaChayim, which the Rebbe gave each one of us, Chof Mar Cheshvan Tov Shin Nun Aleph, Shasti Nosei. The Rebbe gave it to us, Kuntis Eitz HaChayim. The whole point of the Kuntis Eitz HaChayim is to address this difficulty. Now, I'm going to learn about Achdus Hashem, and I'm going to tell myself the world doesn't exist. It's one big lie. Favos, ich halt nicht bei dem. I'm not ready to live that way. I'm not holding there. So the Rebbe Rashab says, okay, hold by Yehuda Tata. That's the purpose of the Kuntis, to think in Yonim and Chassidus that are realistic for you. And then he flips it the other way. So if I'm only learning Chassidus, or about things that are realistic for me, so why do I learn the Maimorim that speak about other stuff also, the higher in Yonim also? And the basic answer is, I'm learning the lower in Yonim because they're negate to me in Avodah. I can use them in my practical Avodah Hashem. I'm learning the higher in Yonim, so my Avodah shouldn't become depressing. It shouldn't become heavy. It shouldn't become Moresh Chedem. It's nagdish, negative. So the Avodah Bepoyel is on a lower level. The Oira Chasidus gives me joy. It gives me upliftedness, and I shouldn't become heavy. That's basically, we learned Kuntit many years ago. I gave a shiur. We were still in the other room when these shurim started. Also, Zange Stark, Ariella Bas Mazel Tov, the shurim Marlas Chusa for the Fuhr Shleimo Kreva. But when we were still in the other room, he gave quite a meshach man. I gave shurim Kuntit Eitzachayim. I wasn't so thrilled with my shiurim, but I went on for a long time. Anyway, so there's different meditations. What would be a meditation of the lowest levels? A meditation at the lowest level would be Kihu Chayecha. That you should think about the Eibishter, that he gives you life. He gives you life. Right? You should choose God because God takes care of you. And it's kind of foolish to spit at the hand that's feeding you. In other words, the lowest meditations are beginning with me. I exist. I like me. And I should like God because He's contributing significantly to my existence, like pretty much everything, That's the lower Hisbon. And there's a whole bunch of psukim that speak to this idea, where you're Mizboinen and the Eibishter and the Madreges, right? I'm giving you examples. So you're thinking about Hashem as my creator. Almost as if you were to say that I'm thinking about how Hashem benefits me. So my relationship with the Eibishter is based on my relationship with myself. So the Achdus Hashem on this level is Hashem takes care of me. So therefore it's wise that I shouldn't behave in a way which is inconsistent with that care. That's the lowest level. What's the middle level? The middle level, and there's more than one, but the closest it's which means the investment of Hashem in this world is almost nothing. Not nothing, but almost nothing. Right? How much does Eibishter invest of himself in this world? Based on the Gemara, 2 letters. The ganze investment, Hashem's investment in the world, compared to what Hashem is almost nothing. So when you're contemplating this, you're no longer thinking about yourself, you're thinking about yourself. But not how Hashem serves you, but how insignificant you are when juxtaposed against what Hashem is. That's the middle Hisbonenuyos. The highest Hisbonenuyos, you're not thinking about yourself at all. You think only about the Eibishter. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Who's talking about the world? One. Right? These are all psukim that speak to God, to Hashem directly, without speaking about me, without speaking about the world. It's the highest level of Hisbonenuyos. On this level, nothing exists. I don't exist either. I don't exist either. I don't exist either. So a person really has a choice. If you want to be honest about the honesty of Chabad, you have a choice. You can choose a Hisbonenuyos in the first class, we'll call it Mimalei Kol Almin, where you're being misboinen in how you need the Eibishter, but the beginning of it is you. You could do a Hisbonenuyos in the second class, which is Madreg of Sovev Kol Almin. You taka being misboinen in how the world is nothing, but you're thinking about the world. You're just arguing that it's insignificant compared to him. And we're going to have that second Hisbonenuyos here in a moment. And the third Hisbonenuyos is not about the world at all. In other words, it's not about me. It's only about the Eibishter. It's a madreg of Eineid Mulvade. You know, like the Gemara about Nochem Ish Gamzu. The story of Nochem Ish Gamzu is a crazy story. Nochem Ish Gamzu was a crazy guy. But he wasn't crazy because he was crazy. He was crazy because he's different than us. And anybody different than us has to be crazy. I mean, the ultimate story of Nochem Ish Gamzu is not the story with the box of treasure. That's not the ultimate story of Nochem Ish Gamzu. The ultimate story of Nochem Ish Gamzu is that Nochem Ish Gamzu is very, very sick. He's affected by many diseases, illnesses, which he brought on himself as a punishment, because the Gemara tells a story that a poor man asked him for food, and by the time he took the bread out of his bag, the guy dropped dead in front of him. The man was so hungry, he wanted to get him food. By the time he got it, and Nochem Ish Gamzu could not, it's like Gemara Mefereshes. He couldn't forgive himself for this. So he asked for Yisurim, and he got Yisurim. So he was laying in a bed in the house with every disease imaginable, and the home was a churba. It was a shack, and the bricks were falling apart. It was falling apart. It was falling apart. And they ran into the house to pull him out, and he said what said in last week's Pashas Upinu es abayis. Right? V'acharei kein yovei hakein liris abayis. He said, take everything else out for it. Take out the furniture, take out the pots and pans, take out the children's toys. And they said, Rebbe, it's a sakon. He said, do what I... Anyway, they took everything out of the house. The last thing they removed from the home was him. The minute they carried his bed across the threshold, the house collapsed. The Gemara tells such a story. The house collapsed. Neheras. Munished. See, Nochem Ish Gamzu lived in God's world. Right? Who's going to take care of me? God. You know the old joke. A younger man has a daughter who's getting married, and he makes a l'chaim. So the boys are bringing themselves, and the girls are bringing themselves, and the father, the chosn, are bringing with his friends, and the father, the kals, are bringing with her friends. So the father, the chosn, sits down with his friend and says, "What do you think of the chosn?" He says, "I don't know. Today's chasanim. They don't come to meet you. They don't come to ask your parents to shusin, take your hand, the daughter's hand in marriage. They're almost like you're doing them a favor." He said, "But one thing, he keeps on calling me God." I say, "Vos meinste?" He said, "How are you going to make a living? God will help." What do you have to the chasaner? God will help. Say, if he calls me God, how bad can he be? You get it, yeah. Nochem Ish Gamzu lived in the world of God. God takes care of me, and God is not going to let me get hurt. But the halacha is you're not allowed to do this. As the Gemara in Masechta Psachim, that you're not allowed to be with your makom sakon. When it comes to bedikas chometz, right? If you have a hole and there could be a scorpion, there's a whole shaila how you do bedikas chometz. Doing a mitzvah, shluchi mitzvah, and is hurkin. So why can't I put my finger into that hole? And the answer is you're not allowed to put yourself into a sakon of the shchicha. Yeah. So how did Nochem Ish Gamzu do this? The answer is because when we Nochem Ish Gamzu, we'll live like Nochem. Nochem Ish Gamzu was in the madreg of Yosef HaTzadik. That it says about him, Oder HaGever HaShiftach Ba'odam. He's not allowed to make a keli in panosa, a keli in teva, for the Eibishter's hand. His life is in danger. He's not allowed to try to help himself. He has to leave it to the Eibishter. If you and I do that, we're meshugah and we're not going to live very long. Yosef HaTzadik was punished for making a hishtadlus. for asking somebody to help him, because in the Madrega of Yosef HaTzadik, the B'tochen and Hashem is so pure, the Eibush takes care of me, finished. So this is the Madrega of Achtas Hashem for people who are holding on the Madrega of Achtas Hashem. So there's different Madregas in Hisbonenuyos. So Rabbi Sa, here's what I want to get to. This Tanya also begins with a Hisbonenuyos, with a pasuk. And the pasuk with which this Tanya begins is the pasuk Ani Hashem Leishanisi. If you have the Tanya handy, yeah, it's inside the last line on page 50. The meditation that the Alter Rebbe chooses, Ani Hashem Leishanisi. He could have chosen Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. He could have chosen Havayu Elokim. He could have chosen Havayu Elokim Ein Eid Milvadeh. He chose this pasuk. The Alter Rebbe here, the meditation in Perek Chof of Tanya is Ani Havayu Leishanisi, means that the Eibishter hasn't changed. What's the pshat? The Eibishter hasn't changed. Before the Eibishter created the world, he was. After the Eibishter's world is no longer going to be, he will be. And now that there is a world, he is, and there's no difference before, during, and after. Yeah, but, Abefot, what's the question? Yeah, but, the world is a change. Why? The Eibishter made the world out of himself. Huh? The Eibishter made the world out of himself. The Eibishter didn't get supplies from some other store. The Eibishter created the world from himself. Yesh meyayin. So the Eibishter made the world from himself. Before he created the world, it was him. And now there's a little teeny tiny piece of him, which is not him anymore, it's world. That's a Shanisi. He says, Ani Havaya Shanisi. Before there was a world, there was nothing but God. After there's not going to be a world anymore, there's going to be nothing but God. Whatever that means. And it's not so pashut. It's not so pashut. The world, the pashut is forever, even according to the Rambam, let alone according to Kabbalah and Siddhis. But now that there's a world, we say, Lo Shanisi, there's no change in him. How could you say there's no change in him if before there wasn't a world and now some of what was him is now world? So the Alter Rebbe is going to be developing this pasuk of Ani Havaya Leishanisi. And as I said to you before, classically, Beklolos, the Hisbonenuyos of Ani Havaya Leishanisi goes into the third class. It's not Mimalei Kol Almin, it's not how Hashem feeds me. It's not Sovev Kol Almin, it means how Hashem created me, but next to him I'm insignificant. It's his meditation in Hashem alone. And if how you see things from the perspective of the Eibishter, there's only the Eibishter. This Rabbi Sai is what we're going to be learning in the next Perek and a half. Perek Chof, and the first half Perek Chof. Follow, we're going to be discussing Achtas Hashem. I want to throw this out. In chapter 33, Perek Lamed Gimel, the Alter Rebbe brings the idea of Hisbonenuyos. Chapter 33 is about Hisbonenuyos, about contemplation. And specifically, Hisbonenuyos about Achtas Hashem, about the unity of God, and he makes two references, two Mokoides. One is Commission is Baya Le'il Perek Chof Chof Aleph, from the Mashal of Machshava V'Dibur, and the second Commission Kosav Mokamachad, this means Shar HaYichad V'Emunah, Shemevi Mashal Gashmi Lazeh Me'er HaShemesh. Alter Rebbe is going to, in chapter 33, he doesn't give you the meditations. He tells you where to look for the meditations. He says, I gave you two meditations in Tanya for Achtas Hashem. One of them, the second one is in Shar Yichad V'Emunah Perek Aleph Beis in Perek Gimel. And the second one is right here. Chapters 20 and the first half of 21 are built around the pasuk Ani Hashem Leishanisi, and there are Hisbonenuyos, there are contemplation into Achtas Hashem and the highest madrigas. Meaning, you can have Mimalei Chassidus, I don't know if this exists, but in theory it could, that begin with the pasuk Ani Hashem Leishanisi. Or you can have a Mimalei Chassidus which begins with a different pasuk, and at some point in the pasuk the Rebbe says, Yesh lahavim mashakosov Ani Hashem Leishanisi. Ani Havaya Leishanisi is a meditation in how the Eibishter doesn't change even though he creates the world. Now, you understand that this is Torah. What's Torah? Chachma. You have to question it. Not you're allowed to question it. You must question it. You must question it. Well, we can question like this. We can Reisef and Allah Zat You can question and question and question and question. Four words. Ani Hashem Lo Shanisi in Sefer Malachi. I have to tell you, a childhood distraction. Okay, ich hab doch ADD. It's part of our culture. It's a generational thing. But D stands for distractedness, not for deficit and disorder, for distractedness. When I was a child, I read the Shmuasen mit Kinder und Jugend. I read the Talks and Tales because I didn't read English. I didn't read English at least till I was 10. I didn't read a word of English. So I read Yiddish, and I was busy. Trust me, I didn't read that material. And I read all the Talks and Tales. As children, we collected Talks and Tales, like other children collected baseball cards. Used to go into the Americas and go look in the basement to find another little pamphlet. Now you can buy the whole set. Then it was a Yakara Matthias. So there's a story in Talks and Tales that's called Shmuel Sutton. That's the name of the story, Shmuel Sutton. I don't know if the story is true, but the story is about a guy named Shmuel, who was a Nugget. He was the leader of the community. He was the Panis Chodesh. He represented the community to the government. And the prince or the governor or the squire or whatever, the Putitz, was a drunken guy, a shikir, a lowlife, a very, very unpredictable, moody man. And he made some impossible gzeira for some stupid reason. He was an anti-Semite. Anti-Semites. Can you call him anti-Semites? Jews were there for punching bags. That's what God created them for. They didn't even realize that they were abusing people. That's not mentioned. These are Jidden. So I forgot the Prati Asipa, I don't remember. I just remember the punchline. The punchline is that Shmuel Sutton decides he has to go see the king. And he has a connection with one of the king's family members that he did a big favor for. And they were indebted to him. He says, listen, I'm telling you, this time he's out of his mind. He's so incensed. He's so cooked up about whatever it is this Gzeira is. It's a terrible idea for you to go see him. He says, listen, I need you to get me into his room. So this relative, whether it was his mother or it was his wife or it was somebody else, says, I'll see what I can do. And he goes into the Putitz and he tries to reason. The Putitz is drunk like light. He was always shikir. And the minute he heard the word Yidden, he got very agitated and angry and nervous and don't bother me. But he had sich eingestellt, he nudged, he says, 4 Wörter. He can say 4 words. So he goes up to this guy, Shmuel, Hanogid, and says, you can tell the 4 words. So he walks into the Keser and he says, Vayomer Hashem El HaSatan. When I hear Ani Havai Alei Shanisi in my head, I hear Vayomer Hashem El HaSatan. What's the connection? It's 4 words. That's the only connection. Every time I say Ani Havai Alei Shanisi, I play that story in my head. And the Putitz says, what does that mean? So the Yid says, nu. I didn't make a moitzi, as the joke goes. So the Putitz says, what do you mean? He says, nu. He had to make sure that the guy really meant it. I don't know what his explanation was, but he got him to laugh. And once he got him to laugh, they're about to win the Gzeira. I'm not comparing Vayomer Hashem and Ani Havai Alei Shanisi, but this is what happens in my crazy head. It's 4 words. 4 Wörter. You take those 4 words out of Tanakh, the whole Chassidus is different. Ani Hashem Lei Shanisi. 4 words. 4 words. That's all it is. 4 words. The Eibush says, first of all, Ani Havai, I am God, and second of all, Lei Shanisi. I haven't changed. Understand that based on this rule, that Torah hi v'lilmed ani tzarich. Torah you have to learn, and Torah you have to understand. Torah you're entitled to learn. Torah you're entitled to understand. Torah you're supposed to question. It's not an aveda to question. There's an aveda to doubt the Torah, but it's a mitzvah to question the Torah. So if you want to understand what Lei Shanisi means, you have to translate first the word ani and the word havaya. After you know what Ani Hashem is, so that's why when you learn the Maimorim, I can think without thinking 5 different interpretations of these words. Why? Because when you define Havaya differently, you translate the Lei Shanisi differently. So you have one Havaya, it's one Lei Shanisi. Second Havaya is the second Lei Shanisi. The third Havaya is the third Lei Shanisi. In Samach Vav, you have B'chlal a different Pshat than Ani Havaya Lei Shanisi. And in our Tanya, we also have a Pshat Ani Havaya Lei Shanisi. Hashem made the world from himself. Before he made the world, there was nothing. And now that he made the world, arguably there's a world. So he tells you, you should know, Ani Havai Lo Shanisi. I made the world, but nothing changed. It's called Achtas Hashem. And he's going to present it to us in 2 steps. Okay, so now, I just spoke for 24 minutes and 55 seconds. Haven't taught you anything, right? I beat a kettle, dervaile. So I want you now to do me a favor and look inside, okay? So I'm beginning again on page 50. We learned this last week. Uleva'ed heitev, 6 lines into the Pedic. Inyan zeh. Uleva'ed heitev inyan zeh. 7 lines into the Pedic. I want to explain this well. This meaning that the first 2 mitzvahs, Anoichel Yilecha, Achtas Hashem, and the Israel Avodah Zarah, are the whole of Yiddishkeit. I have to explain first in brief. I mean, this is not exactly brief, but I guess it's brief. Inyan umahus, the idea and the substance of Achdus Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of the idea that God is one. And remember, it's a mitzvah sasei deiraisa. It's a biblical commandment to study his oneness. To take this pasuk and violation, you see all 4 words of it, and to dissect it and to question it and to challenge it until you come to the ultimate understanding of what it means ani, the ultimate understanding of what it means havaya, and therefore the ultimate understanding of what it means leishon nisi. Okay? So the Rebbe says, I want to discuss Achdas Hashem, and he tells you what it means. She'nikle yachad yuchad is called eins und einzig, one and only. V'chayel ma'aminim, everybody believes Shehu levadihu, that he exists alone. Besides for him there's nothing. Without him there's nothing. And outside of him there's nothing. But ultimately nothing besides him exists. That we all understand that before the Eibishter created the world, Mamish, he was all that was, just like before the Eibishter created the world. There was literally nothing but the Eibishter. Now that Hashem created the world, it's still true. There's literally nothing but the Eibishter. Zokter, like it says in the Siddhis, Pirkei Rabbi Lezer originally, Ata, who you are he. No, it says in the margin, Nuschat Tefillah, it's not Pirkei Rabbi Lezer. Achalei Nivra Ha'olam, you are he who existed prior to the creation of the world. Atahu Misha Nivra Chulu, you are he after the creation of the world was effected. And the Alter Rebbe teaches Pirush, this means who mamish, you or he mamish believes shum mashini without any change whatsoever. Even though before the Eibishter created the world, it was only you, and now the Eibishter created the world, there's you in the world. After Hashem says the world doesn't exist. Look at the next words. Kidiksiv, as the pasuk says, I am God, says God, and there's nothing changing him. So Achdas Hashem is not about him being the only master of the world, the only governor of the world, the only balabayas of the world. Achdas Hashem is about being the only thing. Period. End of conversation. That's the ganze mais. Because of this world. This world. The higher worlds. Einam poilim do not affect shum shinoi ba'achdusa yizbarich, any change in the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even though bihi bar as they are brought forward as creation, may ayin from a non-existential state, liyesh to an independently existential state. I like to translate words precisely. Okay, yesh means independent existence. Mitzias means form. Okay, yesh means independent. The ayin means from a non-existence, or as Chassidus explains, ayin means from a question, from where I don't know its source, and because I don't know its source, therefore it's yesh, it's independent. Shekamoy shahaya, just as he was, who he was all by himself. Yachadam yuchad, in Yiddish, eins und einzig, one and only. Kedem ibara, before he created the world. Kain hu lavadehu, it continues to be true that he's all alone. There's nothing besides for him. Yachadam yuchad, one and only. Achash abaram, after he created the world. Why? Mishom, the reason why the world does not exist at all. When you juxtapose it against the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mishum, because the Kula Kameh, everything next to him, Kila Chashiv, is like nothing worth. Uke'ayim ve'efes mamish, and it's as if it's nothing and nothing mamish. Okay? So I want you to hear me out. I gave you an introduction. And in my introduction, I presented you with this notion of 3 different levels of contemplation. And I'm calling it, for purposes of labels, Mimalei Kol Almin, Sovev Kol Almin, and Atzmus. And by the way, I forgot to mention, when you do this research on the different Hisbonenuyos, different contemplations, and appreciate that there's levels. Of course, if you're contemplating the Eibishter, and you're contemplating yourself, your relationship with the Eibishter, naturally, obviously. But there's different degrees of my existence, and different degrees of his existence, and different degrees of our relatedness, our connection. You know what's the Achilles heel? You know what makes you crazy? Mamish crazy. Yesh Me'ayin. Because one Maimer puts Yesh Me'ayin into class A. A second Maimer puts Yesh Me'ayin into class B. And the third Maimer puts Yesh Me'ayin into class C. In other words, you could be Hisbonenuyos and Yesh Me'ayin and say, the whole purpose of God is to create me. You could be Hisbonenuyos and Yesh Me'ayin and say, since Hashem is making me every second of nothing into something, I'm like nothing. Or you could say, since Hashem is making me into something, I don't exist, I'm only Him. And different Maimonim give you different versions. Yesh Me'ayin, in the different Maimonim, are placed in each of these three different castes. It's the odd one out. It's the one that you can't fix. You can't put it into a particular place. The Maimonim contradict one another because there's three aspects to Yesh Me'ayin. In one aspect of the Yesh Me'ayin, Ayin is only Moka Liyesh. It's Mimalei Kol Almin. In another aspect of Yesh Me'ayin, the Yesh Me'ayin comes from Sovev Kol Almin. And another aspect, Yesh Me'ayin comes from Atzmus, Hussein, Sab Baruch Hu, which is where the Yeshus comes from. So Yesh Me'ayin go into each one of these different places. But anyway, I digress. I gave you three classes of meditations. Here the Alter Rebbe is going to bring the second and the third, not the first. That's how I'm teaching it to you. Emphasis on the word, this is how I'm teaching it to you. This is how I'm teaching it to you. The Alter Rebbe here does not bring the contemplation that Hashem takes care of us and gives us life and food and health and safety, so we owe Him, in quotations. But he does bring the middle level. That the relationship between Him and us is such that next to Him we're like nothing. That's what we're reading here. In other words, the Alter Rebbe is going to teach us Ani Hashem Lo Shanisi on two levels. In this Perek Chof, it's going to be on a lower level, and in the next Perek, the beginning of Perek Chof, it's going to be on a higher level. What's going to be the difference? In this Perek, we're going to contemplate how the world next to Him is almost nothing, which is the Hisbonenuyos and Sovev Kol Almin. Hashem creates the world. Hashem creates the world exists. Before He made it, it didn't exist. Now the creator does exist. That's a change. But when you contemplate the investment, when you contemplate how much of Himself He puts into the world, as they say in Oloteda, in perfect Yiddish, it's nothing worth. Nothing worth is in English. It's Yiddish, gar nicht wert. In English, it's worth nothing. But in Yiddish, we have Yiddishized English, just like we have Hebraicized Yiddish in the Maimonim, yeah? It's nothing worth, gar nicht wert. But it's not garnished. It's not nothing. It's virtually nothing. And that's what we're reading now. Okay, I'm going to say what I just said again. I presented to you in my introduction three madregas of Hisbonenuyos, three classes. The lowest level we're calling Mimalei Kol Almin, the second level we're calling Sovev Kol Almin, the third level that's what's most in. In this Tanya, when he quotes the pasuk Ani Havaya Lo Shanisi, 4 words, Ani Hashem Lo Shanisi, that Hashem makes the world, that there's no change in Him from before, during, and after, he's going to give us two interpretations of the Ani Havaya Lo Shanisi. Number one, how Havaya goes on Sovev Kol Almin, and the Lo Shanisi is explained that the world is insignificant. And number two, how Havaya goes on Atzmus and Hussein himself, and Lo Shanisi means literally the world doesn't exist at all. So let's learn the first things first, as they say. Okay, you with me? So the Rebbe says, let's read on. Mishom, the reason is, how many lines on the top of the page am I? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 lines on the top of page Chavav Amud Aleph, or page 51. The world next to Him is like nothing. Like nothing doesn't mean nothing, it means almost nothing. Ayin ve'efes mamish are like nothing and nothing. Now I just want to tell you, for the purposes of being precise, what's the difference between ayin and efes? Ayin means how the world exists and the Eibishter's thought of the world. Efes means that the Eibishter, how the world exists in the Eibishter before he even thought about it. You understand? Dibur is yesh, Hashem speaks, the world exists. Thought is ayin. Pre-thought is not even ayin. It's not that it exists in a state of bittul, it's efes, it's garnished. This is before the machshav. So in this shtikele, he's explaining Ani Havaya Lo Shanisi, not that there is no world, but that there is virtually no world. Kimat no world. Ki es havos kol eila meis elyenim v'tachtenim, the creation of all of the worlds, the highest and the lowest. Me'ayin liyesh. from a non-existential state. Ayin means two things. The word yesh me'ayin can either mean a non-existential state into yesh, which means an independent state. Please remember this or write it down. Me'ayin means a non-existential state, and yesh doesn't mean an existential state. That's mitzias. Yesh means an independent existential state, okay? But sometimes it's on a mind of feeding in heaven that yesh me'ayin is a bitmi, it's a question. Yesh, the world exists independently, doesn't need anybody outside of himself. V'haraya me'ayin yavi yezi, like it says in this kapitel. If this world has a source, where is he? If this world has a creator, let him reveal himself. So me'ayin is a bitmiya. Me'ayin. Where does the world come from? I don't see the source of the world. So I say the world is a yesh, self-contained, independent. I don't need Rahman al-Litzlan, I don't need anything outside of myself. I exist from myself. This is Mamash Avodah Zarah. It's kfira. So yesh means I exist independently. Me'ayin is the question because I don't see my source. Prove it. So those are two different interpretations. Either me'ayin means from a non-existential existence, or it's a question, I am independent of anything by myself because I don't see my source. It's his fault, right? He did it. Says the Rebbe. Ki Hisbonenuyos Kol Almin is the creation of all the worlds. The highest and the lowest. Me'ayin, from a non-existential state, liyesh to an independently existential state, or alternatively, from where? I don't know the source, and therefore I look at the world as being yesh. V'hayusam of their life, v'kiyumam their existence, hamakayma, which gives them its form, shalayachseru lihiyes, they should not return to their basic nature, which is a piece of godliness, which is ayin ve'efes k'shahaya, nothing and even more nothing as it was before. Einei ella, it's nothing other than davar havaya v'ruach piv, the words of Hashem's mouth, and the air that those words exhale, hamalubash b'hem, which is invested in them, and that's the entire investment of the Eibishter in the creation. So what's the pshat ani havaya lo shanisi? I made the world by speaking a few words. So what's the big deal? I'm God. I can speak infinite words. I can speak infinite thoughts. I have infinite levels of my existence higher than thought and speech altogether. So I said a few words. So that's the pshat ani havaya. Sovev Kol Almin is you haven't changed, not because there's no change at all, but there's no significance to the change. In other words, on the first level, we're not saying the world doesn't exist. On the first level of Achtz Hashem, the first pshat and ani Hashem lo shanisi, which just Maimah brings, we're saying that the world is so nothing compared to what the Eibishter is, it might as well be nothing. Questions or comments? Keep going. Ulamosha, for example, a person. He speaks one word. Jackie Mason died last year, yeah? At the Reven Fartayid. So he had his Jewish humor. So one of Jackie Mason's jokes was about Jews and fighting. You know anything about Jews and fighting? They're the biggest cowards in the world. They're overweight and they're slow and they don't like to get bruised. Jews solve problems with money, with words, with bluff, but the Jews are not Italians. They don't hit each other. Which is the best army in the world? Huh? Which one in the world? Israel, right? And everyone claps. I got a bunch of Jews in the audience. He says, I don't understand it. You mean a Jew in the street? You put him in a uniform. There's a whole shtick about Jews in the uniform and out of uniform. And then the joke goes on saying, one more white. You're going to say, one more white. One more white. You say, one more white. What's that one white? Nobody knows what that one more white is. If you understand Jackie Mason's humor, it's funny. If you don't, I offended you and I'm sorry. One white. Hashem said, one white. You understand? When the Jew says, one more white, I'm going to break your teeth. You don't know what that white is. The Eibishter created the world with one word. With one word. I'm finished with Jackie Mason. Okay, so the offensive part is over. The joke is finished. You should know this could be an aliyah for his neshama. We mentioned him in the Tanya class. Maybe it's a yerida for our neshamas, but why not? The man Yidden. It's not so bad. It's not so. There's worse jokes than this, yeah. But anyway, the Eibishter created the world with one word. Now in Chumash it's 31 psukim. It's a lot more than one word. But we say in davening in Ovalot Tzion at the end, Ki b'koah Hashem tzurei lamed. Ki b'koah Hashem tzurei lamed. That Hashem, is Tzurei Lamem, the creator of worlds, B'Ka, B'Yud K, with the two letters Yud K. So the Gemara says that Rebbe has an entire letter in Tanya. He gets the Kedesh Siman Hey, Vayaz David Shem, which speaks to this Gemara. That Hashem created all the worlds with two letters. B'Yud Nivrei Elam Haba, B'Hei Nivrei Elam Hazeh. The Eibush created the spiritual world with the letter Yud, and the physical world with the letter Hey. And the Rebbe has a whole conversation of what it means mystically, and he brings the Gaval D'Keirah about giving tzedakah and mitzvahs ma'asiyos and so on. But the Eibishter created the whole creation, all of the worlds, Lashon Rab, with one word, with one word. So does the world exist or not? A word is something, yeah. But how much attention do we give to one word? And our words are finite, because our days are finite. Hashem's days are infinite, so he has no shortage of words. His investment is one word. So let's read it again. Where am I holding? Well, for example, when benefesh Adam in a human spirit, a person speaks one word. You cannot say that one word is nothing. But you can't give too much attention to one word at the same time. This single word alone, mamish, is mamish like nothing. Or as they say in Allah Teda, nothing worth. If you speak about the relative value of a single word to compare to how many words a person could speak. You know, I've heard people say this, that a person has a certain number of words and they finish using up the words, they can't speak anymore. And somebody even told me, it says in Sifrei Musa, I don't buy it for a second. I don't think it's true. But ich habe gehört, dass in Sifrei Musa steht von Gedeli Yisrael. The reason you can't run out of words, because words come from the neshama, and you can't run out of neshama. It's a koyach, a nefesh malaya esis. But see, as I say, a person can speak in his life many words. One single word is very insignificant, but it's not nothing. That's the value of this world. So ani havaya lo shanisi means ani havaya, I am God who spoke one word to create all of the worlds in plural. Lashon Rabim. It's not that there isn't a world, but is there a world? It's nothing worse. It's gone in red. Because one word, legabe klolos nafshan the better, even when I compare it to how many words I could speak. She bechin is levoshem toisha, which is the middle garment of the neshama, shukecha dibisha, which is the tool for speech. That a person could, in theory, speak words infinitely without an end. So one word from an infinite potential is of little significance. Yeah? So you can't say it doesn't exist, but you can't say it's of any value. The koshke now add another dimension. Think about one spoken word to the power of thought. Right? A thought is like a picture compared to speech. So a thought, let's say for the purposes of this conversation, is 1,000 words. So one word is 1,000th of one picture, one machshava. And you can think infinite machshavas. So what is one word when compared not to how many words I could speak, but to how many thoughts I could think? From which comes this speech. And the thought is the life of the speech. Says the Rebbe, think about one word juxtaposed against how much I could speak, and then think about it a second time juxtaposed against how much I could think. But he's not finished. Ve'ein tzarich leimen, how much more so legabe muhus ve'atzmus hanefesh, when you compare to the neshama itself. The neshama is above words of speech and thought. It exists on a much more ephemeral level. The one word compared to the power of speech has a relativism. The one word compared to the power of thought has a smaller relativism. The one word compared to the infinity of the soul has zero relativism. So what's a word? You can't say it's nothing, but you can't give it much importance either. Sheheim, the etzem of the neshama is Esa b'chinaseh hanal Chabad b'chol, the 10 factors of Chabad. Shemehem nimshchu, which is the source of Eses, machshavazu, the thought, the letters of thought. Hamel bash b'diba there, which then comes out into the speech. Kish medaber, when he speaks. So my neshama is infinite compared to my thoughts. And from my neshama comes thoughts. My thought is infinite compared to how much I could think. To individual thoughts. My thought is infinite compared to how many words I could speak. My words are infinite compared to the value of one individual word. So you have insignificant times insignificant times insignificant times insignificant. One more word. What is a word? Says the Rebbe. In thought you have letters, like speech. They're more spiritual. The faculties of the neshama itself don't have words. They're the root and source of speech. They do not yet have letters. Until you begin to think it. Now, Rabbi say you have to understand that there's a lot of stuff here. The details I'm leaving for next class, which will be after Pesach. But the nekuda is plain to see. And the nekuda is, you cannot call one word nothing. But in every way, shape, or form, it's a virtual nothing. And that's the first pshat, and then the Havaya Leishanisi. Hashem is creating the world from Sovev Kol Almin. He doesn't say Mimalei Kol Almin, you see? Because he would say Mimalei Kol Almin Faket, the Eibush will be our servant. But if you're going to translate Ani Havaya that goes on Sovev Kol Almin, that from Sovev Kol Almin comes one word, Kibukar the Shem Tzuri Elamim, which creates all the worlds, Elam Abon, Elam Hazeh, with Yud and with Hey respectively. So you're not saying the world isn't, you're saying the world isn't anything of value. Now we're not finished with Perek Chof. But when we get to Chaf Aleph, the Rebbe is going to change it. And he's going to translate Ani Havaya and Atzmus. And Lo Shanisi is not going to be that the world is like nothing, the world is literally nothing. But again, the way I'm teaching it to you, the way the Alter Rebbe presents it, he speaks one level, and then he speaks a higher level. Questions or comments? Okay, Pesach, thank you all for coming.